Live now. I don't know what happened to the Instagram thing. It was up. Peace to the family. All right, peace to the family. Peace to the family through Facebook, uh, through Reality Speaks Media, on YouTube. Thank y'all for joining us today. This is the first of lecture series that we start. But before I do that, coming for you with the mind state of liberation, coming from a long legacy of battle stars and freedom fighters. I acknowledge my duties to truth and justice as a Soul Virus Nation representative, and I'm a humble servant of my community. There's no elders, but ancestors may have permission to speak, so I'll speak. Um, Thank you for joining us. We start this right here is the first kickoff of our mini lecture series, and I'm gonna tell you, it started right here in the barbershop, and it started with the speaker that we have coming before you today with Brother Dayvon Love, and he just basically brought it to me like, won't you do something, maybe a little smaller, I mean, maybe for local people, So what we do, what we've done, we've come here in the barber and boot camp. So we're in the barber and boot camp, and here we may just have very few people, I mean, that may come through, but it's basically for the YouTube and the Facebook audience to be able to join us. Reality Speaks, we've been with y'all for 29 years this year in October. 29 years we've been bringing many speakers to town. Anybody from Dr. Francis Cress Welsing to Sister Soldier to Dr. Newton to Dick Gregory, Dr. Barshango, Del Jones, Dr. Khalid Muhammad, uh, Steve Coakley, uh, a host, Dr. Claude Anderson, Dr. James Smalls, Professor Smalls, who we have coming to town in the next 2 weeks. A host of other people that I just can't think of everybody that's off the top of my head, but we'll give you more of those people as we go. Put some on the chat. Now, what's going to happen is he's going to come. It's going to give you 20 to 30 minutes of a presentation about politics and power, how to obtain it in the community. What is politics? Because we don't really understand politics in our community. Although we say that we do, we really don't. We don't know how to change laws. We don't know how to, if a light is out in the street, Some of us don't even know how to go about that, how to get that light cut back on in the community, how to get on the boards in our community. It's a lot of things that we can do in particular. And I'm going to speak about Brother Dayvon, our speaker, very special brother, grown to really love this brother, what I mean, for the things that he's doing in the community. At first, I knew him as a young man, and I'm a hard nosed young man myself, and I saw the brothers running around and they was doing the political thing and trying to do some stuff where they was running for office. And I'm kind of like, back then, to be honest, I'm like, man, the brothers cool, but they all into that politics stuff. You know what I mean? They all into that stuff and all. But you know, you start to respect people. As I got to know the brother, he became a client and just started to understand what it was that he was doing. He started to introduce me to things that he was fighting for, like the Baltimore City Youth Fund that he introduced, that he told me about. Which down the line I will become a person, what I mean, that would actually be able to be a part of the youth fund. He told me the biggest thing, and y'all hear me tell the story all the time. I don't care. I'm gonna keep telling the story about how we got the law changed in the barbering community. So I went to a barbering meeting over and over again. Barbers were complaining about not being able to get more than one apprentice. So I asked the question, what do we need to do in order to make this change? Because they would always say, yeah, it's nothing we can do about it here. So I said, what can we do to change this? That's something you got to do in Annapolis. I had Brother Dayvon on that same day as a client. So I went there today. I said, man, what I got to do to change this law? They won't, we can't get apprenticeships, we only get one at a time. He said, man, that's really nothing hard. It's something simple. Because I'm thinking it was going to take 2 years. I'm going to have to raise like $50,000. I'm going to have to do this and I'm going to have to do that. And he's like, oh, bro, it's just, getting in touch with your delegate. He told me to get in touch with Delegate Cheryl Glenn at the time. I went and got in touch with Delegate Cheryl Glenn. She put the bill in. And the bill at first it didn't go through because it had the wrong wording on it. And then within the next year or so, I'm saying, we got the bill put through House Bill 1317 under Sister Delegate Stephanie. So so he was there to coach me through that. And anytime I need coaching with anything political or different things that's going on, this brother will let me know. But he actually showed and proved just by being in the know, and that actually helped the community because it helped more barbers get apprenticeships. And when we changed that bill, we changed it for the whole state of Maryland. The whole state of Maryland now can have 3 apprenticeships instead of 1. So we changed that for the whole state of Maryland, but that's just from knowing a brother who's involved. So today we want to learn about this process and then possibly come back, within next month or so, and do workshops that we actually want to put on, workshops where people can learn. If you want to run for office, how do you run for office? What's the process? What's the process for, for a lot of these different things? So, brothers and sisters, like I said, this brother was I know he's the debate champion for, I think, my Baltimore City schools. Was it Baltimore City schools? I know it was college. Oh, okay. United States, you know what I'm saying? So, you know what I mean? In the whole United States, a champion. So he's down with the debate. The brother, he does great work in the community. We hope that y'all can call in. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna put the links in. So if you want to call in, you want to be able to join us after he does his presentation. You got questions to ask, write down your questions, and that's how we're gonna do it. So give it up for Brother Dayvon Love. Give him a big round of applause if you at home in the suites, in the streets, wherever you may be.
All right. Greetings, family. For all those that are watching online, want to say peace to the family. Want to thank Brother Jabari. As Jabari mentioned, I've known him for a long time, watched him from afar, been to a lot of the Reality Speaks lectures over the years and learned greatly from them. And so it's a lot of mutual respect and all the work built on each other. So, I mean, one of the things I want to start with is really just the importance of, building community. We have a multifaceted, wide array of people in our community that contribute a lot of work. And everything I'm about to say about, LBS and the, Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle and the work that we do and to talk about politics, all of it is an extension of work that's been done before we got here. And hope that we leave something after we're finished to hand off to folks to build something even stronger. So as Jabari mentioned, this is a conversation him and I have been having for a while. And one of the things that in this particular context, in the context of Reality Speaks, again, as a person who has watched Reality Speaks over the years, and we think about the perspective, the kind of African center, Pan-Africanist, Black radical perspective that Reality Speaks has brought to the community for many years, the conversation about politics is a unique one because I think the way that many of us have been introduced to politics who have a radical political sensibility see politics primarily as a site of compromise, as a site of assimilation into the status quo, into the political mainstream. And so, so I want to start with that to really provide some perspective because, LB Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle, the organization I co-founded, and we've been in existence for a while now, since 2010. We operate from a very explicit revolutionary Pan-African nationalist perspective. Now, how we square that with politics, I want to start with we start with an understanding that and whether and there are a variety of scholars that make the point that I'm about to make. People of African descent are prisoners of war, right? The society is structured on our dehumanization. We're under no illusion that Black people are going to be able to sufficiently integrate into this society, right? We're of no illusion that America is anything but a settler colony, that this society is structured on the system of racism and white supremacy, imperialism, capitalism, colonialism. So we're real clear about that. And we understand that if we are, as a people, to be able to practice any kind of freedom, then we need to build the ecosystem of institutions that allow us to practice sovereignty and self determination. So that is a perspective that we operate from. And we recognize, in addition to the fact that we live in a society structured on racism and white supremacy, that many of the images and narratives that are made most available to Black people and to this society at large, the narratives that we get that are made most available to us are narratives that focus on Black people primarily as objects of other people's thought experiments, as primarily objects of oppression. That there's a societal dehumanization of people of African descent. There's a way that many people who have not been exposed to narratives of people of African descent operating in arenas marked as high levels of civilization. So there's kind of this inherent position of subordination that people of African descent are in this very society. So that's a framework that we start with. And part of the problem is that many of us are taught that in this society, to the extent that there's been any progress for Black people, that progress has come as a result of petitioning white people to recognize our humanity. Right. So when you think about politics and you think about many advocacy campaigns that you see, many of them are about how to get the power structure, white folks in general, to better see our humanity. You get some of that with the emergence, I would say, over the past 10 years, around 10 to 15 years, around conversations of police brutality, right? Where you see these images of Black people being killed by police, being brutalized. And I think there's a way that people see that as making white people more aware of the suffering that Black people face. Police brutality is something that Black people have known about for years. But because it's on, now it's on camera, because of the camera phone, there's a way that people, I think, mistakenly believe that the exposure of certain forms of violence that Black people have known about for a while to predominantly white audiences is some kind of progress. And I think there are many people now who will recognize that, in fact, there hasn't been much progress as a result of people seeing that kind of violence. And I'm gonna come back to that, but I want to talk specifically about politics, and I'm gonna quote Mao Zedong, and it's kind of a rough kind of paraphrasing. But politics is warfare. Warfare is politics that's spilled out of the back room. So in many ways, they are one in the same. Politics is a battlefield where the contestation over resources and structuring the rules that govern this society. That is what politics is about. And the reason that framework is extremely important is because if you, again, from that revolutionary Pan-African nationalist perspective, if we understand that sovereignty is the ultimate goal, then we're not engaging politics from the perspective of wanting to, in an acceptable way, endear ourselves to the power structure. We have to think about it as warfare. We have to think about it as a site, as a battle, or contesting for power. And that is a place where, one of the things I'm most proud of in terms of LBS is that we navigate the space of politics in a way that is very different than many traditional advocacy organizations who may do good things, but are not able to pursue an agenda of Black liberation as explicitly as we do. I'm going to start with the fact that LBS, we were very intentional when we were founded to be a LLC and not a nonprofit. And that was a really intentional decision that we made. Because when you're a nonprofit, there are limitations on the kinds of advocacy you can do. You can't directly call out elected officials, right? You can't directly engage in the electoral side. And there's a way that we're able to bang on those in elected office in ways that nonprofit organizations cannot. There's also just a greater level of independence, and we have more of a social entrepreneurship approach to sustaining our organization. So we're not grant dependent. We're not dependent on philanthropy. We're not dependent on rich donors, right? And so that's a really important aspect of our advocacy, because in many ways, the kind of built-in aspect of our business model is the fact that we have over 400 people that sustain our organization. In addition to like fee for service work we do, that's work that we do on our own terms. These are contracts. These aren't, major donors that are giving us large sums of dollars to do the work that we do. And that's really important for a political organization, because there's a level we can speak more unapologetically on issues in City Hall, in the Maryland General Assembly, in ways that other organizations that may see themselves as similarly positioned, we're able to speak more unapologetically than many of them are able to. So why is that important in talking about and breaking down politics? Because politics, there are three things that for me are what is engaging in politics. Now, a lot of things are political, right? So everything is imbued with politics. But in terms of engaging in the arena of politics where you're contesting for power, I argue that there are three central things that determine whether you're on the battlefield of politics. And that is whether you are impacting the distribution of resources, whether you're impacting government policy, or building independent Black institutions, right? So those for me are the three things that if you're engaged in that, you're engaged in the political arena. And when you're engaged in that warfare with this society, there are a bunch of mechanisms, there are a bunch of different structures to engage in order to be able to address the concerns of a person that's engaged in that work. Now, I'm gonna go back to one of the things I said at the beginning. Many of those that are Black nationalists, Pan-African nationalists, you may think to yourself, I want nothing to do with the system, right? And so engaging politics is engaging the system. Well, one of the things that, news that I got to break to you is, if you are going to the grocery store, if you're driving a car, if you're using the internet, you in the system, right? So it's not a question of whether or not to engage the system at all. By very virtue of using the very mechanisms that allow you to traverse civil society, you are in the system. The question is how you engage the larger systems around you. That is the question. And you can engage the larger systems around you from a perspective of wanting to be dependent on the benevolence of people outside of our community, or we can navigate these systems from a perspective of sovereignty and self-determination. So if you navigate it from that latter perspective, then a part of what that means is that you have to be knowledgeable about all these different systems, because these systems, for instance, are giving our tax dollars to developers, giving our tax dollars to major corporations, right? So money that we pay when you go to the store and you have you pay taxes on whatever you bought, or if you have a house, you pay pay taxes on your house, on your mortgage, you pay taxes on all the purchases that you make. You're paying taxes, and those resources, public resources, have traditionally in America have been one of the greatest starting places for major companies to get contracts. So public dollars have been used as a way for those who have money to accumulate wealth. And many of the wealthiest people, in the world understand the importance of paying attention to politics, because they understand that if they can control the process, if they have control over the structure, that helps them in their fight to try to accumulate more resources and wealth. And so that's why politics is extremely important, because navigating those different systems allow you the ability to impact those arenas that I mentioned earlier. So that's extremely important in thinking about navigating these larger systems. I'm going to give a couple of examples of the importance of that from a radical political perspective, right? So, for instance, one of the things, and I've talked to Jabari about this, one of the things when you talk about local politics, and I want to, today I'm going to emphasize local politics. one of the things I've talked to Jabari about is that the state legislature gives out capital bond bills, right? So these are ways in which the state contributes to to providing money for buildings, for capital projects. And those are things that the legislators decide. They decide who they give those resources to. Well, part of the challenge is that many folks in our community don't know that that opportunity exists, right? And those who are proximate to power will use those resources that our tax dollars pay for to be able to use those for their institutions, right? So again, from a radical black perspective, you don't gotta believe in America, right? You don't gotta believe in the system. But if you're operating a building and you want to provide a service to the community, utilizing that particular process of bond bills that the state gives out every year for people to build buildings, right? For people to use for buildings is something that our community should use. When we don't use it, we cede it to our enemies to be able to use those resources the way that they would like to use those resources. And so, for instance, one of the projects that Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle has worked on, one of the things we helped to develop was the Pennsylvania Avenue Black Arts and Entertainment District, and we're actually working on a project where we're working on building a building, right? And so one of the things that we're going to use to engage it is the public process, right, of using using the capital bond. So again, that's just one example of thinking about the use of a process of a structure that most people don't even know about. It's not something you learn in school, right? It's not something you hear about, very widely, but it's something that those who understand the process are able to utilize. And as a revolutionary Pan African nationalist, if we're trying to build institutions, that is a helpful resource in the building of the kind of institutions we need in our community. And that's not something you don't have to pledge no allegiance to this settler colony. You live in this city or in this state. You have a right to be able to get your legislator and pressure them to be able to deliver those kinds of resources to our communities. Again, small in some ways, but an important levers to be able to use to distribute resources to our community. So that's one example. The other example that I want to use, and this is a little bit more extended, um, and I'll probably wrap up on this particular example. One of the things that if you're familiar at all with places like Baltimore, around the country, the phenomena of mass incarceration, the weaponization of the criminal justice system against our community. And one of the things that we're seeing is even though that there's actually been a lot of progress made, a lot of organizations have pressed legislatures and local governments to pull back on some of the policies that led to mass incarceration. We're in a moment now where there's a attempt to swing the pendulum back in the more conservative, tough on crime perspective. And so one of the things that has been happening in Baltimore and around the country, um, for instance, like Sinclair Broadcasting, Fox 45, they have been successful, unfortunately, in perpetuating a narrative of this idea that there's been this, huge surge in youth crime, right, around the city. Now, what's interesting is when you look at the data, it's not a tremendous surge, right? The incidences of 10 to 13-year-olds or young people engaged in these kind of crimes is minuscule compared to the overwhelming majority of our young people. But it's a story that's running on Fox 45 every day, constantly. And it ran constantly back in 2023, and it led to the legislature in this Maryland General Assembly. It led to the state elected officials and leadership in particular putting forward a bill, a juvenile justice bill, that essentially would shrink the capacity or shrink the ability to divert young people that are better off served outside of incarceration. Because really, when we want to fight mass incarceration, if there's some people that are really harming the community, it makes sense that they need to be away from the community. But there are lots of young people that would be better served not even touching the criminal justice system if there was some early intervention, some diversion. And so what the Maryland General Assembly has done has extremely contracted the capacity for diversion in the legislation it wants to put forward. I mention that though, because when we talk about politics, Fox 45 has now, because of its capacity for propaganda, it's essentially now operating like an advocacy organization. Like Fox 45 is now making decisions about the politics in this state, right? And so, so the very fact that we have a juvenile justice bill that's essentially trying to be more punitive on our young people, that's because Fox 45 is using the mechanisms of the government to advance their agenda. And we've actually spent this entire Maryland General Assembly, the state government in Maryland works as 90 days, January to April. I'm there, several days a week. And I've had to spend a lot of time over the past, couple of months trying to fight against this bill and weaken it so it doesn't have that kind of mass incarceration impact. And Fox 45 is doing that even in other contexts. Fox 45 is now and Sinclair Broadcasting is now because of David Smith, who's, very, very wealthy. He's been able to use his money to pay to get signatures for ballot initiatives. So one of the ways that the government works is if you can register for a ballot initiative to change a certain policy. If you get enough signatures, it's on the ballot so that when you go to vote, in November, and if you vote, you'll see that there are these different ballot questions that they'll ask about policies that most people don't know much about. Like most people who go vote, you may vote for a candidate and then you have all these questions. And most people just vote yes for the questions. But one of the things that is going to be on the ballot in November is to shrink the size of the Baltimore City Council from 15 to 8 members. The reason that comes from David Smith, the owner of Fox 45 and Sinclair Broadcasting. The reason that that's important is because if you shrink the number of members of the city council, you're essentially shrinking Black political representation. Because if you have less districts, it creates more possibility to have white people being the representatives in those districts, which means that a wealthy person like David Smith has more ability to be able to impact the policy of the Baltimore City Council. Whereas in our current configuration, we have sufficient Black electoral representation. But David Smith has been able to pay money to be able to get signatures. And when I say pay money, I'm saying be able to pay for the work it takes. He's been able to pay for the work it takes to get people to sign a petition for a ballot initiative to decrease the number of members on the Baltimore City Council, therefore weakening Black political representation. And again, that's extremely important because if we want to move policies with an explicit Black, perspective, an explicit target towards empowering Black people, then it's important to have the kind of Black political representation to be able to make those kinds of policies more viable, right? So I know that was a lot of information, but I wanted to just give a few examples of the way that politics works, right? That in some of the structures and some of the things that again aren't widely known or aren't widely talked about. But if you're a revolutionary, right, and you care about the material conditions of Black people, politics and policy and civics is one arena of many arenas. And I don't argue that politics is exclusively the place where revolutionary things can happen. There are all kinds of other things as revolutionaries, as those engaged in, struggle for our community. There are a variety of arenas to struggle in. Politics is one of those essential arenas that if we engage it from the perspective that I described earlier, as a site for warfare, as a site where we're contesting for power and resources for our community, then we understand that politics is one of many important aspects for us to focus on and for us to make sure that we have the tools and weapons to be able to engage that arena. I would argue that one of the long-term goals of LBS is to fulfill a particular need in our community. And that need is that we need independent Black controlled electoral infrastructure because currently the way politics actually works is that any person that runs for office, they know the spaces to go to get the resources and to get the institutional backing to be viable for office, right? They know to go to, the Greater Baltimore Committee, right? They know the major unions, ASHME and stuff. They know that. They know to go through programs like Emerge Maryland, right? They know that they need to be on the 40 under 40 daily record list, right? Like they know the places to go to get the support they need to be able to raise money. And what that means is that the elected officials, even though there are elections, they're not selected by us. They're curated by a corporate philanthropic, political class of people that are selecting the folks that then are the options that we have to choose from. And so even though Baltimore has majority Black elected officials, that's not Black political power. right? Those are black people that have been selected by the establishment as choices made available to us. And LBS, we see it as our job to put pressure on those who are elected to political office to make it hurt, not to do the things we know need to happen for our community, right? And so that's the warfare aspect of it. So we're clear, they don't work for us, right? And until we have that independent black electoral infrastructure that I mentioned a few moments ago, then that's the posture that we're going to be in. Where we're going to have to make elected officials do the things that are good for our community. And so I'm never disappointed. Like when black elected officials do things that don't seem to be in the interest of the community, I'm not disappointed because that's not who put them there, right? And so again, we need to build the infrastructure to put them there, and that's a long-term goal of LBS, which is to build that machinery so that we're producing our own leadership as opposed to reacting to leadership that is essentially being curated for us. But I say that to say that in terms of the importance of we're revolutionary folks and we're engaged in the arena of politics, politics is important because we need to create the infrastructure so that we can put people in office. But until then, we have to do the work of making elected officials do the things that are in the best interests of our community. Again, it's one of the many sites of struggle for black liberation in our community. So I'll stop there. I don't know, Jabbar, if there are any questions or anything from people in the chat.
Okay, okay. Um, so I'll that's my that's my little hand claps right there. Nah, we appreciate you, and this is just a start because it's way too much information, way too much information to bring out just in one session. You know what I'm saying? In one of these many lecture sessions, but we talking about really gaining power. We talking about the blueprint for Black Power, Dr. Amos Wilson, and many folks that have written about this topic and these topics. How do we gain politics? I know some say, what I mean, we ain't gonna do it. We ain't gonna free ourselves through economics. We ain't gonna free ourselves through politics. And all everybody who's in one field saying that we ain't gonna do it like this one. Really, it's all of it. What I mean? It's all of it in one big bunch that's gonna actually make it happen. You know what I mean? And we need to work together, what I'm saying, in those different arenas. You know what I mean? Because as you do build economic structures, you are going to need some politics. You know what I mean? Some laws going to have to be changed. Some permits going to have to be given. You know what I mean? You're going to have to be some fighting for to change some district. You know what I mean? And change the zoning here and zoning there. You know what I mean? So I'm familiar with some of those things because even to be here in this shop right here, we had to fight. We had to fight for like a year to get the zoning correct because it's not zoned for commercial. So we had to go and get signatures. We had to go to all of the community organizations. And by the way, that's how I met Brother Carl Stokes, by the way, knocking on his door. And he said, well, hey, I'll help you. And he definitely helped me out. And we became friends, from that day forward. But, yeah, it's gonna be a lot of fighting on every single front, though. You know what I mean? And not just one.
Right.
So just wanted to ask a few that I wanted to ask a few questions.
Yep.
Number one, so and excuse me for my ignorance all the way, but I'm asking questions too because I know a lot of Black people just don't understand it, and we have to gain understanding. We have to gain understanding. So, what you do for a living is called the lobbyist. Is that what you call it?
So I gotta be careful because lobbying is an activity that has a very particular legal definition. So I'm not technically a lobbyist.
Okay.
So let me explain what that is. So a
Okay.
lobbyist, essentially, their job, they are paid to engage government on behalf of a client of a company, right? So let's say like
Uh.
Comcast,
Okay.
right? And I don't have an in-house legislative person, right? Or maybe I do,
Okay.
but then I'll hire a company. So if I had a lobbying firm, I may hire a firm, and that firm's job is if I need legislation passed. If I let's say,
Oh.
they only allow me to do a certain level of streaming, and I want to go into a different area, and that's a government thing, then what happens is that I'll hire a firm and that they'll do it, right?
Right.
The reason why I got to be careful because I'm not a lobbyist in the sense that we don't have clients.
Okay.
In many ways, our client is the community, it's Black people. You
Okay.
get what I'm saying? And
Okay.
so now I do work that a lobbyist would do, right? I
Okay.
do the some of the work I do is the kind of work that you might pay a lobbyist to do. But we do it as an organization with a mission. And then the reason why I say I gotta be careful is because there are laws that govern lobby. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so there's
Exactly.
a way that if the state believes that, let's say the state thought that I had a client and I just wasn't saying anything, like that can become an issue. You get what I'm saying? So I'm got to be real clear. Like I'm not a lobbyist,
Okay.
right? Now I could be hired to be a lobbyist, and the skills that I use would be useful for a lobbyist or a lobbying firm if they
Right.
wanted to hire me. But that's also important because very few grassroots organizations are engaged at that level in terms of engaging local government in the policy process. You know what I mean? So that's why and in fact, I'll tell you, we've been such a pain in the ass for legislative leadership. A few years ago, they actually expanded the a definition of lobbying, and they call it grassroots lobbying. So we had to actually look at the new rules they created to make sure that we didn't fall under any of those rules.
Right.
We were clear, and this is my theory. I can't prove it, but it's my belief that that was an attempt to try to get at us. That was an attempt to try to make it so that we had to disclose a bunch of our information
Right.
so that folks could find out stuff about what we do to find ways to attack us.
Right.
So again, so that's a good question, and I wanted to expand on all that just to give people an insight into like even the technicalities around like being a lobbyist, what it means, some of the things you got to be careful about, and some of the ways that the establishment has tried to weaponize those rules against us. We just have been smart enough to make sure that we don't break any of them rules. But we understand that like I said, I'm not a lobbyist, but I do lobbying. I do work that a lobbyist would do, but our client is black people, so to speak.
Should there be more black people um becoming lobbyists per se? I mean, and fight like how I mean, because y'all, I guess on the off season, y'all study. Now, how do you get into studying like what new laws people are fighting for? Like, is there like what I mean, like y'all probably do they put those forth like all during the year before they go into session, and y'all kind of study and before you hop on and say what bill that y'all actually going to fight or rally for? How do y'all come up with?
So I'm gonna answer your first question first. So should more black people become lobbyists?
Yeah.
I'll say yes and no. And here's what I mean by that. Lobbyists get paid a lot of money,
Okay.
and the highest paid lobbyists work for corporations.
Right.
So part of the problem we have in America is that corporations are able to pay lobbyists in the direction against our
Right.
community. You know what I'm saying? So there are, in fact, some of the most well paid lobbyists that I know in Annapolis are black.
Right.
And I actually had one of those folks who runs a major lobbying firm kind of jokingly try to hire me.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And so and it would be a lot of money. You know what
Mhm.
I'm saying? So I would say now the reason why I say so no in terms of more black people being lobbyists,
So
they actually fun,
they mostly argue for the company to get, what I mean,
exactly
for things, most of the time.
right, and they're
Okay.
arguing for things that they're not arguing for black people most of the time,
Right.
right? It's
Right.
usually like oil companies or major corporations that want to tax break, you know what I'm saying, stuff like that. Those lobbyists tend to be that's because the corporations have a lot of the money. The most high power lobbyists, they're the ones that usually on the wrong side of stuff.
So what do you call those who argue? I mean, are they still liable who argue against some of the policies, that new laws and stuff that they're trying to bring down? What do you call those people? Just citizens that's coming, what I mean, to fight or.
So this is what I was going to say is that because I do think black people need to be more engaged civically
Right.
and do some of the activities that lobbyists do and know the process. You
Okay.
know what I'm saying? So we need, for instance, it would be good. Like if LBS had, millions of dollars, one of the things we would want to do is have people at every committee hearing, right? Hearing what the testimony is on the different bills that come before the legislature, all the subcommittee hearings, all of the kind of off session convenings that the legislature does. Um, and so I think so it's important, I think, for black people to be more civically engaged because a lot of the stuff that moves, a lot of it moves because people just don't know the process, right? So you got people that are able to get major things, money, certain policies, just because most people don't know. And a part of the story you told in the beginning about the barbering bill. See, what I knew is that they don't care about that. They're not going to fight you on that,
Right.
right? So if you come with a good argument and a good perspective, when you brought it to me, I'm like, oh, that's going to something they're gonna want to claim that,
Right.
right? So So that's why when you said it to me, I was like, oh, that's not going to be a problem.
Right. Easy
You know what I'm
work.
saying? Nobody's going to pay. They're not going to pay attention to that enough for that to be a big issue. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So some
Right.
of it is just like people don't even. They just don't know. They just don't know where to go to be able to make an impact. So there's that. To your question about um like how do I like knowing how things work, like the off session stuff. I liken it to sports in the sense that, like, you know how sports there's a certain
Right.
cadence, right? Like, if you into like the NFL, to go to the combine. You know what I'm saying? To go to the Pro Bowl. Which colleges are the major colleges people recruit from. So if you're an NFL scout, you're going to Michigan, you're going to Alabama, you're going to Ole Miss, you're going to Clinton. Like, you know where to go. And so part of it for politics in terms of the skill is you have to have a sense of like where are the things happening at? Like where do people meet at, right? So for instance, like I know that, there are certain galas, for instance, that most elected officials go to. The only reason the LBS really goes to galas, aside from like if their community, like if you do a gala, we're gonna come to it, right? But besides stuff like that,
Yeah.
the only reason we go to galas is to run down on people because we know that's where they're gonna be. We know that's where elected officials are.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So
Right.
so we know, and from there and conversations there, we hear about like what legislation are folks thinking about. You know what I'm saying? There's a conference on the Eastern Shore in the summertime called MACO, Maryland Association of Counties. We've gone for the past 3 years in a row. It's a 2.5 hour drive. It's essentially like spring break for elected officials. You know what I'm saying? But we go because that's a part of where we find out, what bills are coming down the pike. What are the conversations about? So politics in many ways, I think about it in the way that you think about sports. Like if you into it, you know where to go and where to be to find out information about
Exactly.
what folks are thinking.
Exactly. Um, family, if you want, we'd actually have the link, and where you can type in a question that you may have. We are certainly live right now, brother. So I just wanted to ask you this. So far as politics, we having this discussion in the barbershop the other day, and just talking about whenever corruption happens, of course, the face of corruption is black people everywhere. You know what I'm saying? And definitely, I mean, anything that you want to go into, but certainly in politics. And we were just saying, is it feasible? I guess for black people to run for all. For those, there's some people who could really run for office and win, but they ain't gonna run because they scared because they know once they put themselves on the ballot, the people gonna come to them like, "Huh, is this you here?" Or did you do this right here? And that, and did you do, you know what I mean? And keep us away, I guess, from politics because of, moral code, you know what I mean? And how they would jam you up, you know what I mean? Because they try to be able to control mostly everybody that come in that can actually be able to do something. So I guess, can we really get into politics? I mean, like, let me ask you something. When you get into politics, you know what I mean? Like for the most part, because I hear like even Sister Delicate Glenn, you know what I mean? I saw where she said she's gonna be doing a podcast and basically talk about how she was set up. You know what I mean? And you know what I mean, in the midst of it. Now I don't know how true or whatever that is or whatever, but I'm just saying, you know what I mean, there's a lot of people who say that they got set up, you know what I'm saying, in the midst of the whole thing with the politics, and
Mhm.
they come with bribery and stuff like that. So how how easy, I mean, for us to get into politics when we know that we facing so much, when you want to get into help, but ain't nobody perfect, ain't nobody no angels.
Right.
So once you get in there, anything that you ever did and you ever touch, somebody gonna look into, because they gonna want you to chill out.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
what?
So there's a bunch there. So let me take it in pieces, right? So the first thing I'll say is that one of the reflexes, I think, especially people with our political sensibility,
Right.
one of the reflexes we got to resist is the notion that everybody in politics are crooks.
Right.
We got to resist that impulse.
Right.
And the reason I'm saying that is because most of our people have been socialized with a theory of change that's aligned with the status quo, right? They've been socialized in these institutions where they believe in this, they believe in America, they believe in the mythology, right? And I would argue that most of the elected officials that I engage, many of them actually, I believe, want to do good, right? They just, they haven't read Dr. Clark and Dr. Ben and, what I mean, Marimba Ani. They haven't been exposed to that, right?
Right.
So that's the first thing. And the reason why I start with that, particularly with this audience, It's because I think when you write people off that way, it keeps us from really understanding what's actually happening. Because then to go to the part of the question around corruption, there's a way that what happens is that whenever a black person is trying to do good the best they can, and then that label of corruption is on them, right? Now it makes it almost impossible for them to be able to do something good, right?
Right.
So anytime a black person is able to get to a position to deliver for our community, and then they get hit with that corruption piece, then it's almost like, what's the point? Like, is there a way that we could win if there's just the natural belief that all of them are going to be corrupt? Now, what I said earlier in my talk around the fact that most of them don't work for us.
Right.
Most of them got what they got not because they built within our community, but because they went to the places where they know elected officials go to get money, and then that's how they're able to get a platform, and that's how we vote for them, right? Now, so I'm clear. So even though they're not crooks, how they got there wasn't through our community, right? So
Right.
that's the complexity of it. Now, the important thing about the corruption piece, politics is about contestation over power and resources. And anytime a black person, regardless of their ideology, is able to be in a position to be able to impact that distribution of resources, they put themselves at risk of being targeted by a powerful force whose resources they take in money or resources and power from, right? So that's a really important thing for people to know. So regardless, even if a person is not a revolutionary, right?
Right.
And then I give a really good example, and I'm sure this audience will be familiar. Think about somebody like Marion Barry,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Marion Barry, he was in SNCC, so he had radical politics. Was everything he did in line with like the revolutionary Pan African? Not necessarily. He did some great things, right? He was able, in many ways, you could attribute Prince George's County being, until recently, one of the wealthiest black counties. You can attribute that to Marion Barry. And one of the things that Marion Barry had was a loyal base, right? He was able to demonstrate that he did things that impacted people's lives. And so it made it so that he was able to be elected even after he was convicted for doing cocaine,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so he was hit with that corruption label. But the thing about Marion Barry is that again he delivered for his constituents, right? And so I use that example to say that regardless of ideology, we got to know that when a black person who has decided that they want to take a stand for our community is in many respects going to be targeted, even in moments when they may be complicit with the white power structure, right? They're going to be more vulnerable to attack. You combine that with the fact that a lot of black elected officials don't have a lot of money. And there's this perception that people have that elected officials they have money. And as a person who has now worked very up close with a lot of elected officials, a lot of them be broke. And a lot of them, the job of an elected official is how they make a living.
Right.
And so one of the things that there's the trainings that I do around legislative advocacy, and one of the things that I tell people that when you're looking for a legislative champion, one of the things you want to look for is you want to make sure that an elected official has a sustainable financial sustainability for themselves, like they actually are good. Because if an elected official is broke, then it's easy to control them.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of what happens to a lot of our elected officials, where they may mean well. They get into the seat. Leadership comes to them. Will run somebody against you. And they're now in a position where, and it's not a lot of money. I mean, if you're a city council person, I think it's like 60,000 a year.
Okay.
You know what I mean? If you're a state senator, I think it's like 50. I think if you're a delegate, it's like 40 something, a year.
Wow.
So it's not a lot of money.
Mm.
Right. And so for some of these elected officials, like they live in like regular people, you know. And then the other thing I'll also include in that is this. There's also a psychosocial aspect to this as well. There are a lot of black elected officials who them being in elected office make them somebody. I'm gonna quote John Henrik Clark. One of the things he described, the issues that black people face is the issue of ego starvation.
Mm.
He always told you nothing, you stupid, you nobody. For a lot of these elected officials, it do something for them to have that honorable so and so next to their name,
Right.
right? Or
Exactly.
that councilman so and so, or
Mm-hmm.
senator so and so. And there's a way that this power structure plays on our collective frailty around that ego starvation, where I'm gonna make you deputy, chief of the, whatever committee, and those are ways that they're able to control people, right? So again, it's really complex. I'm gonna come back to where you started around the corruption piece, though, and that is that there's those of us that are actually trying to navigate the political process to get resources to Black people are likely going to be tagged with the notion of corruption. That was attempted. You mentioned the youth fund in the beginning.
Right.
That was something that they tried to do to us.
Right.
Right. The youth fund was tagged as being corrupt. And there was a period of time where there were people who were afraid to touch it,
I
right?
remember.
Because of the way
Yeah.
that the media characterized it. And they used the issues that former Mayor Pugh had to try to attach her to the youth fund
Right.
as a way to criminalize it. Right. And it was a story that was run over and over and over again. Now, fortunately, because of the basic community that we had, we was able to survive that. But I want people to look back at the coverage, right, of the youth fund, right, and the way that it was covered. And people who know our work, like you benefited from it. A lot of people in the community benefited from
Right.
it, right? So it wasn't this corrupt cabal of whatever. It was us trying to make it so that more Black people can get money that work with youth that are using methodologies that are community based. But and so again, that we got to be really careful that when the term corruption is used to describe Black elected officials or describe an effort that's an attempt to get resources to Black people, that we got to be careful. Now, that don't mean that there aren't crooks. That don't mean there aren't Black people that are using the system to enrich themselves. Like that happens. But what I'm saying, particularly for this audience, is we got to be more discerning. Like
Right.
we gotta do more investigation before we quickly call something that is told to us as corruption. We got to be more careful when we go along with that.
Yeah, because I mean, they use the media. I mean, whenever they put something out, we fall for it every time. We fall for the trap every time. I mean, I guess in while we talking about, what do you think about the whole thing with the Fanny and the
Oh man.
I mean, I mean, I'm only asking, what I mean, because I don't know the whole story. You know what I'm saying? I know the basic of the story, but it just seemed like to me, I mean, of course, Trump is the big man, you know what I'm saying? And of course, oh, she's gonna prosecute, go looking, go see what we can find, and then as soon as they can, these people got big people in high places and they go looking, and then again, the person would be made to be looked as a very corrupt person when they ain't doing no different. Not to say that, what I mean, what people do is right, you know what I'm saying, or whatever, or what she did was right. But you'll be out there hung dry and looking like you the worst person who ever lived on the face of the earth. And the sad thing is that most Black people would join in. You know what I mean? Look at her, look at her. And that your plate ain't clean yourself, but everybody sit there laughing and grinning and skinning and all those different things. So what do you think about that whole process?
All I think about it is it really shouldn't be a story.
Right,
It's unfortunate that's a story. It
right,
distracts from,
right,
and I'm not anybody who knows me, in my work, one of the biggest critics of the Democratic Party, but this is clearly, the Democrats, their best case against Trump is this case.
right,
You know what I'm saying? And so it's just it's sad that, you know, the personal life of this sister has become the story instead of Donald Trump trying to steal the election from and trying to get find votes in Georgia to flip Georgia. Um, so it's just the lesson to what we've been saying about the way that they'll weaponize this against Black people in ways that isn't weaponized against Donald Trump himself, right?
right,
Or other politicians, like other white politicians. Their way. I mean, even if we look at like what happened to Catherine Pugh, you know what I'm
right,
saying? There are a bunch of other white people that's doing the same thing she was doing.
right,
Now they weren't mayor,
right.
right? So I think some people would say, well, she's mayor, she has a greater responsibility. But my point is, and I think the point, or at least what I would say to your question is that we just got to know that when it comes to us, there's going to be a high level of scrutiny, and that term corruption is going to be weaponized against us in ways that it's not weaponized against white people.
Now, let me just ask you, like, how, for those that don't really understand, because it doesn't really, like, I guess nationally, if Black people make up, is it 15 or 18% of the population?
14 or so.
14 of the national population. How important is the Black vote nationally? And break that down. I mean, how important that is. Because like I said, if you sitting there thinking, you like, well, how do our vote matter,
Mhm.
in general. So
So there are a few ways to break that down. And so there's national. I'm gonna start with local and then talk about national.
Okay.
Um, there are several states that have sizable black populations. Maryland has 30% black people. I think Virginia is at about 20. South Carolina is around 20. Um, Georgia is approach. I think it's around 30 or so. Mississippi is like 36. Um, so there's states like, particularly that kind of black belt South, where you have sizable black populations. And I would argue that one of the most impactful ways for black people to use politics is to organize in those states to actually wield their power. So let's talk about Maryland, since we're in Maryland. Maryland, I think, has the largest black caucus in the United States,
Mm.
right? And one of the things that I've been on the record saying for many years is that the black caucus in Maryland has not wielded its power sufficiently.
Mm.
That the black caucus in Maryland, if it organized itself along these principles, could control the state legislature, right? If it wanted to. And in our early advocacy work, LBS and our early advocacy work, one of the things that we would do, even though other advocates would usually ignore the black caucus because the black caucus didn't see itself as a power base, right? One of the things we would do is we would try to force the black caucus to take a formal vote on our position, even when they didn't want to. And what that did was us being able to pressure the black caucus, when the black caucus took a formal position on something we did, then what that did was is that it gave it more weight. It gave the position that we took more weight in terms of the fight that we were having in the legislature. And one of the things that I would argue has happened over the past few years is that the black caucus has actually stepped up a bunch and it's begun to wield its power more deliberately. And so some of the things, like one of the things that LBS has worked on is a work around reparations for the war on drugs, right? And so we were able to pass a bill, the Community Repair and Reinvestment Fund. 35% of the tax revenues from recreational cannabis goes back to the communities impacted by the war on drugs. That was 2023 that we was able to do that.
Right.
And a big part of that came from the Black Caucus and the support from the Black Caucus in making that happen, right? So, and I would say, even though the Black Caucus has stepped up, I would say even still, right, it still had the Black Caucus, if it organized itself in a particular way, it could control policy in the state of Maryland,
But why is
right?
it? Why do you think it's not
I just
as
think the consciousness, like
the consciousness?
people are thinking about, black elected officials, their theory of changes, black faces in high places, right? So there still isn't the level of understanding. I mean, as black nationalists, like it would be natural to us. Let's build amongst our own. We're gonna build power there. That's just not how a lot of them are socialized. A lot of them are socialized in traditional spaces. So that's the state level. So in terms of our vote mattering, I would say in those particular like state like Maryland, those other states, if you live in those states, like that's a place where your vote really matters locally. To your question, national, the particularly the presidential election, there are really only a few states that matter. So the electoral college, right? So each state they vote, and then each state has a certain amount of electoral college votes. Certain states are pretty reliably Democrat or pretty reliably Republican. Maryland is a state that is overwhelmingly Democrat, right? So if, like, for instance, one of the things that LBS does, we tell people, like in Maryland, don't vote for Democrats, vote for a Green, vote for a third party as a way to pressure the Democrats, right? Because there's a way that our vote in the presidential cycle don't
Right.
matter because Maryland is going to go so overwhelmingly Democrat.
Right.
There are only a few states that actually matter. There are only a few states. Those states include states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, um, North Carolina. Georgia is now recently flipped, so Georgia's big, and Georgia is actually a good example of black people enhancing its electoral power, and so the Democrats was able to flip Georgia. Arizona was also flipped, so now Arizona is a swing state, right? Um, Florida, even though it's becoming more reliably Republican. Ohio, even though it's become more reliably Republican. But I say that to say that those swing states are the states where the election actually matters,
Okay.
right? And one of the things that I've said, I haven't actually said this a whole bunch on camera, but I'll say this here. If black people really wanted to control the politics of the United States, I mentioned Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania's a swing state. And you have a city like Philadelphia, right, where a majority of black people are not registered to vote.
Right.
So let's say you registered, you know, in big numbers, black people able to register to vote just in Philadelphia,
Right.
right? That could carry Pennsylvania, Michigan, which is a swing state, Detroit, majority of black people that not registered to vote. Let's say they registered in numbers. Michigan, that's a swing state. Wisconsin, right, has Milwaukee, majority of black people that not registered to vote. Let's say you're able to get those in mass numbers, right? You take just those three states and those cities that are heavily black. If there was an effort that we're able to get them together and to have black people vote just in those three jurisdictions, those three cities, right, to vote a particular way and go to the Democratic Party and say, if you don't put these bills in the Congress, if you don't do these executive orders, then we're gonna tell people to stay home. That's actually real leverage.
Mm.
Part of the problem is that not a lot of the black people who are talking in the public sphere about national politics have this approach or perspective.
Right.
Because too many of them controlled by folks for whom that would be too much of a threat. That would be like real power
Right.
that would really shift the balance, right? And
Mm.
again, I just mentioned three cities and three swing states that if you watch like cable network news and you hear them
Right.
talk about the election, you will hear Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin,
Wow.
right? Georgia,
Wow.
right? Georgia. And Georgia, Georgia, black people already have that. So you take those four actually,
Mm.
Georgia and Atlanta, Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, Detroit and Michigan, and Milwaukee and Wisconsin. You take those four and you make it so that they say this is what we need in order to get these votes, that would scare the shit out of the
Right.
Democrats. And all and my one of my dreams is one day to be able to pull something like that together.
Wow. Wow. And so, like, locally, and just say Baltimore. I guess in Baltimore City, what is it? 60? What is what make up
61% about.
61% of the population? Like, we should be showing up running things in this city, right? Like you said, a lot of people don't have money when they run for election, a lot of those different things. And so there's some people who think that, I mean, you can't buy, because you listen to Dr. Claude Anderson, Dr. Amos Wilson, and say that we gotta, be able to fund our politicians and be able to put them in office so that they can be able to work for us. There's some people who don't agree with that concept that we can't buy, we can't put our own politicians in. And do you believe that, I mean, that's how, like somebody like yourself, if you decided to run for mayor, what I'm saying, and you almost will have to get in by the people. You know what I'm saying? Do you think that yeah.
Well, here's the thing. I would say that we do need to build the infrastructure, right?
Okay.
We need to build the organization needed. So one of the things that LBS would eventually want to do is to be able to have the resources and backing to be able to, have the resources to put people in office so we could be competitive, right? And so that would require like relationships with black institutions, black businesses to come together and say
Right.
we want to help to fund that. Now, what that means though is that we need black institutions and black businesses to have a heart and perspective for the community and for the people.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? One of the challenges that we've had that LBS has had, because a lot of brothers like yourself, grassroots organizations, grassroots businesses, we get a lot of love from. When it comes to some of the bigger black business people, right? That's been a little bit challenging, actually. Like a lot of the
Mm.
bigger black business folks,
Because they so tied into
they tied
the
into the system.
into the machine, and it's
Ex-
like, I mean, if they did something or they put their name behind this, they scared to lose whatever or lose this or lose that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that's the challenge. So I think that's part of the thing where it's like, we need to build amongst those who are, like-minded in the sense that we want to empower our community. Um, and what I know is that there are going to be certain elements of the black business community that's not going to be with us because their politics ain't our politics.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? There are a few exceptions,
Right.
but there are actually a few pretty interesting exceptions on our part of black business people who support our work, but it's still not nearly enough. And so, but I think that if there's broad grassroots organization, then we can produce the resources that we need to be able to organize ourselves, to be able to put people in office and do the fight. But it is going to take a lot of work. Like it's one of the things, as I mentioned, it's a long-term goal of LBS to be able to build that machine, and it's going to take time to build that level of machine.
Right. Right. You oftentimes hear Malcolm X talk about voting in a block. You
Mhm.
know what I mean? And what exactly does that mean, voting in a block?
Yeah, I mean that's one of the things that's hard to um, actualize because it takes tremendous amount of organization. It could mean any number of things. One of the best examples that I can think of in this current moment, I'm sure a lot of your viewers have paid attention to what's happening in Palestine,
Mm,
and so there's a lot of Arab Americans have said that they're gonna not vote for Biden because of what's happening in Palestine. And there was an effort by Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib. She's a Palestinian. She represents an area in Michigan around Detroit and Dearborn, has a large Arab American population. And there was this effort that she launched where in the primaries, in the Democratic primaries, urging people, Democrats, to vote uncommitted instead of voting for Biden for the nomination. Usually the incumbent president is just a breeze, it's a formality. But she urged folks to vote uncommitted as a way, and the polls for the general election between Biden and Trump are real close. So any little bit of taken away from Biden is something that is a cause for concern. And so when she called for that, there was a lot of people that were ridiculing her for calling for that. And in Michigan, about 10%, 100,000 people voted uncommitted,
mm,
almost as a protest vote
right.
against Biden. And so now the administration is now, at least in its rhetoric, trying to be more sympathetic to Palestine and trying to switch up some of the things that it's doing because of the concern. So in terms of like, how to, use our vote, um, to me, that's a good example when we talk about a voting block. Like they knew they weren't going to beat Biden, but the whole point was to send a message on a particular policy to say, because you're taking this policy, we're going to vote uncommitted. And so now the Biden administration is sending people to Dearborn and these communities that voted uncommitted to try to find a way to shore up. And so so in terms of, to me, that's borrowing from Malcolm X. The whole
Okay.
voting block is like, if you demonstrate that you're a block, they got to go and shore it up. And that
Okay.
means that you get to make demands on them in a way that otherwise they wouldn't care.
Okay. Was that is that similar to I heard they were talking with Trump supporters in New York, you know what I mean, truckers and all stuff talk about they was gonna be together and they wasn't gonna take stuff into New York and stuff. Did you hear something about that?
Nah,
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah. So they, if he was convicted of, what I mean, some of the things, or if they trying to make him pay some of the money back they was supposed to pay, that they was gonna all come together and they wouldn't come into just somebody was talking about the if just New York alone, that if they didn't nick those drops in New York, that it would like cause a big problem, in general. So, I guess that's just some of his supporters or whatever. And I guess, you know, so I would,
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
I heard
yeah,
about
yeah.
that.
So yeah, Ricardo was actually talking about that the other day. But that's pretty much so what would you say? How do we, because we way behind, well, in so many different ways, not just politically, but where do we start? You know what I'm saying? To like to start to open the eyes. I know some of it is joining community. Yeah, I mean, just people getting with their community associations in general. You'd be surprised of the things that you can get done in a community association because my mother was a part of hers in Berea, and just the things they was able to do, like getting new trash cans, getting lights on, getting lights put in certain places, and just different things that you just don't think that you have the power to do, that you actually been on those committees, you got the power to do. You know what I mean? Whether it's more policing in that area or more neighborhood watch or whatever, so what do you urge us, where do you urge people to start if we're gonna make a change in the community? Where do you urge people to start so far?
So I'm gonna say two things to that. The first is along the lines of what you just said about, I urge people to start with addressing just local things in their community and just learning how that works.
Right.
Right? You in a community, the playground shitty, figure out how to make it so they got to fix it.
Yeah.
And in the process of doing that, you're gonna figure out how stuff works. You're gonna
Right.
figure out whose responsibility is what. Is it city? Is it the school system? Is it the housing department? Is it the comptroller's office? Like just by virtue of fixing a problem like that, that is a really good way to learn how the different systems work. Right. So that's where I would say to start. Right.
Okay.
The second thing I must say, and this is in some ways this is a critique of I think certain tendencies that I'm seeing in like the activist arena. There's been, I think, a huge wave of people into like online activity and online activism. And one of my biggest challenges is that if you want to engage in political struggle, you gotta do it like boots on the ground.
Right.
Like you gotta, and it's hard. Like political struggle is hard.
Yeah.
Like and it takes time. And I know for a lot of people, you want instant gratification.
Exactly.
You have big ideas about revolution. You want them to happen now.
Exactly.
And for me, it's like, no, we gotta build. Like I'm 36. I'll be 37 in May. And I'm fortunate that I started, this work early enough that I'm at a place where now I am a force in the local political landscape,
Right.
right? And my organization's a force in the local political landscape. But that took 14 years to get to that place. I think a part of what happens is people kind of dream big and then they don't do the work of like building a track record and building a base and
Mm-hmm.
then being in a position to influence the larger political terrain.
Exactly.
My hope is that as we continue to build, we can be a force in national politics. That's
Right.
kind of like the next stage,
Exactly.
right? And maybe in the next 5 years, LBS can be a force in the national scene, right?
Right.
But it would be skipping a step to just directly go to that, as
Right.
opposed to start where I am and actually building that base, building that track record, being able to impact
Exactly.
policy locally and then on a state level and then nationally. And so I say that to say that I think and I did I was on a podcast a couple of weeks ago where I looked at some of the comments, and one of the things someone said was like, they were like, Dayvon, I don't like your incremental approach. Like, I want something more revolutionary. And a part of what I say to that is that you can't do no revolutionary nothing if you don't build the capacity to even be a force. Like,
Right.
what good is talking about it?
Yeah.
Like, what good is saying the pronouncement and
Yeah.
saying, yeah, I'm a socialist, I'm a Pan Africanist, I'm a rat. Like, what good is saying that and talking about it if you don't have the capacity to be a threat to those in power that are upholding the policies and upholding the systems that you want to destroy? And I
Exactly.
think part of the problem is that people don't really understand what it takes to do the work to actually be a threat to the power structure. Like there's
Exactly.
a way that LBS is a threat to the power structure in Baltimore and in the state of Maryland. And again, that takes time. And so one of my biggest things that I would say is like for those that and it's not wrong with doing online stuff, right? Like that's a part of like and I'm people who know me, like I like having conversations about like theories of revolution and all like that's cool. But I am troubled that I think too many people are satisfied with just the conversation part as opposed to like doing the work on the ground to build that capacity to actually be a force in politics. And so that's what I would say. I would say like, and again, it's gonna suck. Like the first several years of building LBS, nobody cared who we were. I mean, you even said how you
Oh yeah.
perceived us in the beginning,
Oh
right? It's
yeah.
like
Yeah.
that's just how it is. Like it sucks. It's not a bunch of notoriety. You're not gonna be able to get a bunch of stuff done. People not gonna care. You're not gonna see the impact of the work right away. But that's what it takes. And
Yeah.
if you're not willing to do that, then to me that just signals that a person's not willing to actually do what it takes for revolution to happen.
No
You know?
doubt. No doubt. I mean, things take time, but it's consistency.
Mhm.
It's consistency that actually makes the difference. I mean, it took us a while. I mean, even building the barbering boot camp. And I tell barbers, even when they come through here when we training them, like, look, this barbering thing is not gonna happen overnight. It take time to develop your barbering eye. You know what I mean? To see what it is, shape ups and just different techniques and all. It takes time. It's not like overnight. Even to build clientele, don't happen overnight. Something faster for others, but you know what I mean, but most of the time it's a process. And everything in life is a process. I was telling one of the young people the other day, I said, you want this thing just to happen overnight? I was just explaining to her, you know what I mean? You want to be able to pop it in the microwave, get it right out, you know what I mean, within 1 minute and it's done. I said, no, but sometime in order to get that good food, you got to cut, you got to break out your knife, you know what I mean? You got to cut that oven on, you know what I mean? Stuff gonna take, you know what I mean, 3, 4, sometimes 5 hours to get that stuff tender, you know what I mean, where it fall off the bone. You ain't gonna get that from the microwave. You know what I mean? And a lot of times, we condition not to just to have that microwave approach and not to have that home, you know what I mean? Like, look, this gonna be a joint from scratch. Ain't nothing like them home cooked
That's
meals.
right.
You know what I mean? From our grandmamas and our mamas and all those folks. We don't get that no more because we too used to the McDonald's. Hey, you
Right.
know what I mean? Five
Right.
5 minutes, I'm out the line. You know what I mean? I got an instant meal, quick, fast, and in a hurry. So things take time. It takes consistency with anything that you do, anything that we're going to build. But we got to stop expecting it to happen overnight. Overnight.
And it's
You
not to say that like shit should take time just for the sake of taking time.
yeah,
It's
no.
just that like hard shit just take time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It take time. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, it's just what it is. You know what I mean? But if you impatient, then it's just not gonna happen. And like I said, even with the barber, like I said, if you become impatient, like, man, why I can't get these people in? I'm like, bruh, I've been trying. Do you know how many barbers I trained? Do you know how many barbers I work with where we sat here and we went through the same problems that you're going through right now? But what we trying to tell you is what to do so you be that much further ahead of us. So if you listen to what we saying, you know what I mean? That's that wisdom that you get. You listen to what we saying, you might be a little bit better off right now. You know what I mean? But but you getting frustrated, and we understand because we all have been there. We all done been frustrated, you know what I mean?
That's right.
But we trying to tell you and trying to teach you, with the whole thing. But let me come out and close out correctly.
Yep.
All right. We thank you for Brother Dayvon for coming out, spreading some knowledge and information. So look out for workshops that's going to be coming up, and he'll be coming back here for more and more topics and different things because we got a lot to learn. And we're gonna be bringing people through the community. We're gonna be bringing people through the internet, national leaders and all. But reality speaks. Information plus Black power breaks the chains, and we appreciate the knowledge. I mean, there's a lot that I need to learn, that I need to know. Just in general, you're always gonna be learning in general. But we appreciate this guy. He said he's gonna be 37 years old, young man. Because this year I'm gonna be 49 years old myself. So we're gonna be doing this every Wednesday at 7 o'clock with Reality Speaks and constantly continue. So hit the like button, like the YouTube channel. We only like I think about 4 subscribers away from 8,000 subscribers. So when we get off of here, by the time y'all watch this again, we expect to be over 8,000 subscribers. Help us build. We do have Brother James Small coming on March the 17th from 1 to 4. So we'll put more information out about that. But we appreciate y'all for joining us. I think we got a lot of information. It's a lot more to come. We thank you and we say peace until we see you next time. Give it up again for Brother Dayvon Love. Thank you.